At exactly 4:38 a.m. in the gray-blue half-light of the Norwegian Sea, a NATO frigate's radar console painted a return that didn't make sense. It wasn't the slow, steady smear of a distant airliner. It wasn't the familiar arc of a patrol aircraft. This was a needle of energy, spiking into existence at the edge of detection. Too fast, too clean, too deliberate. For one long second, the operator thought it was a glitch. Then the track updated again. And the speed estimate jumped so high, the software briefly refused to print it. Out there, beyond the horizon, the ocean looked calm. But the calm was a lie. Because that morning, somewhere to the northeast, beyond the cold latitude lines and the invisible boundaries of warning areas, Russia was testing something the modern sea was not designed to outrun. A hypersonic missile system widely believed to be the 3 M22 Zircon, an anti-ship weapon Russia has repeatedly showcased in naval test launches, including launches attributed to the frigate Admiral Gorshkov in the Barents Sea. And the part that kept NATO planners awake wasn't just speed, it was timing. The NATO formation, ships operating as part of a standing maritime presence in the high north, wasn't supposed to be the centerpiece of anyone's weapons trial. Yet in the compressed geometry of Arctic seas, not aimed at you can still mean close enough to kill you. NATO has publicly emphasized its high north maritime deployments as a readiness signal, and Russia has publicly emphasized hypersonic tests as a deterrence signal. Those two signals were now flashing at each other across the same water. The location mattered more than headlines could explain. In the North Atlantic and the Norwegian Sea, every route is a corridor. Every corridor is watched. And every watch is mutual. Under the surface, the seabed folds into trenches and shelves that can hide submarines like shadows behind curtains. Above it, maritime patrol aircraft stitch patterns across the sky, dropping sonobuoys, floating microphones, into the sea to listen for the quietest signature in warfare, the faint, mechanical heartbeat of a submarine. That morning, NATO's ships were already in a posture that looked calm from a distance and tense up close. Electronic support measures were sampling the spectrum. Air search radars were cycling modes. Sonar teams were listening for biologics and machinery, separating whales from propellers by instinct and training. In the Combat Information Center, the watchstanders lived inside a dim, red-lit world where seconds were currency. And then that impossible track appeared. At first, the contact came in like a rumor, a whisper on the edge of the screen. The system tagged it as unknown, and that label carried a weight that outsiders don't feel. Unknown doesn't mean enemy. Unknown means you are late. Unknown means you are behind the event. Unknown means whatever is happening is already happening without you. The operator called it out. The tactical action officer leaned in. The air defense commander asked for a second sensor. Another NATO ship in the group tried to correlate. The track flickered, then stabilized, then accelerated again. Within seconds, everything changed. The estimated velocity, derived from successive radar updates, climbed into the realm associated with hypersonic profiles, numbers that, in naval warfare, collapse the comfortable timeline of detection, classification, decision, and engagement. Hypersonic weapons are feared not only for speed, but for how they compress human judgment into machine time, and anxiety echoed in multiple analyses of Zircon's claimed performance and the difficulty of defending ships against such threats. And the crew didn't yet realize the most dangerous detail. The contact's path was ambiguous. It wasn't a clean ballistic arc like a traditional missile. It wasn't a steady, level cruise, like a subsonic anti-ship missile. It looked instead like a fast-moving object that could adjust, climbing, dipping, even bending its line in ways that made prediction feel like gambling. That's the nightmare of a sea-skimming endgame paired with a high-altitude sprint. You might not know the real target until the last moments. And in those last moments, The ocean gives you nowhere to hide. In a perfect world, Russia would have issued maritime warnings, NOTAMs, and NAVTEX messages, declaring a missile test area and keeping everyone well away. In the real world, even when warnings exist, they don't erase fear. They simply draw a box on a map and ask sailors to trust that the missile will stay inside it. But what happens when your formation is close enough that inside the box still feels like in your direction? The NATO commander did what commanders do when physics starts to dictate tactics. He tightened the formation's defensive geometry without making it look like panic. Ships adjusted spacing to maximize radar coverage and missile engagement zones. Air defense sectors were reassigned. The group's helicopters were pulled back because a hypersonic event turns the sky into a liability. Then, the next layer of the sea began to move. A submarine, NATO's quietest chess piece, was already somewhere ahead, operating in a place no one would name aloud. Its job was not to be seen. Its job was to hear. And on its sonar, far away, there were changes that felt like pressure building behind a door. Because Russia wasn't alone out there either. Russian Northern Fleet waters, Barents approaches, Kola-adjacent routes, and the gateways to the Norwegian Sea have long been associated with layered defense, surface escorts, maritime aviation, Deiken, and submarines that can shadow or screen. If a high-profile frigate was conducting a hypersonic test demonstration, the odds of additional assets nearby, submarines, reconnaissance aircraft, electronic warfare, were never zero. The sea rarely hosts a single actor in isolation, especially during strategic signaling. NPR now. Back on the NATO frigate, the watch team faced a brutal truth. They were looking at a contact that might be a test vehicle heading to a designated impact zone. Or it might be a live-fire demonstration deliberately designed to be detected, an intimidation message wrapped in telemetry. Or in the darkest corner of the mind, it might be something worse, a launch profile that could, with a minor change, become an attack profile. This is where the ocean becomes psychological warfare. Because no one wants to fire first, but no one wants to be the one who waited too long. The NATO group's air picture began to fill. A maritime patrol aircraft appeared on the tactical display, likely a P-8 Poseidon or similar platform, feeding tracks and calling out emissions. Fighter jets were placed on alert at distant airfields, their pilots sitting in cockpits, engines cold, minds hot. The ship's vertical launch systems were ready, their missiles sealed in steel cells beneath the deck. Silent, expensive, and hungry for orders, and still the hypersonic track kept moving. Then something unexpected happened. The radar return began to degrade, not because it slowed, but because the atmosphere itself can become a weapon at hypersonic speeds. At extreme velocity, the air around a vehicle can ionize, in creating plasma effects that may complicate detection and tracking, depending on altitude, aspect, and sensor type. Even when the object is detectable, the track quality can degrade in the exact window when you most need certainty. In the combat center, uncertainty is contagious. The track's altitude estimate changed. One sensor suggested it was higher. Another suggested it was lower. Data links attempted to fuse. The fused solution stabilized, then wobbled, then stabilized again. And in that wobble lived the most terrifying thought NATO could have. If it descends early, it could be coming for the ships. A destroyer in the group, Aegis-equipped or equivalent, shifted into a more aggressive search posture. The bright fan of its radar, invisible but real, scanned harder. New electronic warfare teams listened for the telltale signatures of targeting radars. Decoy systems were checked. Close-in weapon systems were brought to readiness. The crew didn't say Zircon out loud, not yet. Names can become assumptions. Assumptions can become mistakes. But on the margins of the screen, in the numbers no journalist sees, there was a speed band that lined up with what Russia has claimed publicly. a weapon capable of several times the speed of sound, with tests that Russian officials have described as reaching very high speeds over long distances. Those claims, and the demonstrations Russia has publicized, are exactly why the Zircon name carries such weight in Western naval circles. And now came the moment that made seasoned officers feel like rookies. The track turned, not a dramatic turn, even not a cartoonish hook, just a subtle change, degrees, not dozens. But at hypersonic speed, a few degrees can redraw the entire problem. That slight bend shifted the projected footprint. It pushed the uncertainty cone closer to the NATO formation. One ship's system generated an advisory, another's threw a caution. The voice circuits tightened. The group commander asked for confirmation from every platform. And below the surface, the NATO submarine heard something else. A distant transient. A brief, unnatural sound. Not the constant churn of a merchant ship. Not the wandering clicks of marine life. Something sharp and brief, like a door slammed underwater, a counter detection, a maneuver, or a Russian submarine changing depth fast. No one could be sure, but the submarine's captain didn't need certainty to understand danger. He needed probability. He ordered a course change, quietly, carefully, no sudden turns that would create noise. No speed spikes that would betray position, just enough to shift the geometry and keep the formation screened. Because what the fleet didn't realize is that in a high-tension hypersonic moment, submarines become the most stable weapon system on the board. They are less visible, less emotional, and in some cases, more survivable. Then the air changed again. From the northeast, a pair of fast aircraft appeared at the edge of NATO's air picture, high, distant, approaching the region where the missile's track had been seen. The type wasn't immediately confirmed, but in these latitudes, the mind jumps to familiar silhouettes: long-range maritime patrol, strike fighters, interceptors tasked with escorting, observing, or simply being seen. The message was layered. A missile event in the sea, aircraft above it, unknown underwater activity beneath it. It was a three-dimensional signal. And for NATO, the question became brutally simple. Is this choreography or is it a trap? But what happened next shocked everyone. Not because it was loud, but because it was silent. The hypersonic track vanished. Not the way a target fades with distance. Not the way a radar loses a low flyer behind waves. This was a sudden absence, like someone turned off a light. For 2 seconds, the combat center froze. If it had impacted, there would be secondary cues. If it had broken up, there might be debris, changes, anomalies. If it had gone terminal, it might have dropped beneath radar coverage, meaning it could be screaming toward the sea surface and toward ships. The unseen for critical moments. A NATO destroyer's radar searched lower. The frigate's sensors hunted for sea skimmers. Electronic warfare teams listened for the hiss of an active seeker. Helicopters stayed pinned to decks. Missile crews waited in the steel-walled silence below. Every sailor in that moment understood a rule as old as war at sea. You fear what you cannot see more than what you can. And then, faintly, another ship picked it up. A low-quality track, far beyond, reappearing not near the formation, but deeper into the declared sea space, where a test might logically end. The path now looked more consistent with a vehicle proceeding to a distant impact zone. In other words, it might never have been aimed at NATO at all. Might. That word can save you, or kill you. The group commander forced himself to breathe. He ordered no celebratory stand-down. Not yet. He knew that modern signaling often comes in waves. A first event to draw attention, a second event to test reactions, a third to exploit fatigue. And sure enough, a second anomaly appeared, different from the first, a surface contact beyond the horizon. began transmitting in a way that suggested deliberate presence, not necessarily hostile, but unmistakably assertive. A Russian warship, a shadow, a platform staying just outside comfortable distance. The NATO group shifted again, subtly, maintaining separation, but also ensuring it could not be boxed in. Naval strategy is often just geometry with consequences. Keep your radars overlapping, keep your missile arcs clean, keep your ships from being isolated, keep your retreat routes open. And then the turning point arrived. Not from a missile, but from a human decision, a communication attempt. Somewhere in the chain of command above the cold water and below the politics, a line opened. It might have been military-to-military deconfliction. It might have been diplomatic. It might have been a carefully phrased transmission on an agreed channel, but the core message, on both sides, was the same. We see you. We are not firing. Do not make us misread you. In the hours that followed, the NATO formation continued its mission, but it moved with the haunted precision of people who have watched time compress. Sonar teams kept listening, radars kept scanning, aircraft kept circling, and Russia, having achieved the one thing hypersonic weapons are uniquely good at achieving in peacetime, had already won a small victory. Not a victory of territory, a victory of tempo. Now, because even a test, especially a test, forces your opponent to rehearse fear in real time. Open source footage of Zircon launches, widely circulated by media outlets, shows exactly why the psychological effect is so potent. The launch is fast, violent, and definitive. The kind of event that tells every sailor, this is not a drill, even when it is. And NATO's own public imagery of standing maritime groups, warships in tight formation, flags snapping in wind, gray hulls cutting black water, explains the other side of the message. We will be here anyway. But there was still one unanswered question that lingered long after the track stabilized and the radios quieted. Was the missile's ambiguous turn a quirk of trajectory, a data artifact, a harmless correction? Or was it the real test? Because hypersonic weapons don't just test engines and materials, they test people, they test command chains, they test how quickly humans can interpret incomplete information without making irreversible decisions. And the sea, indifferent as ever, offers no pause button. By late afternoon, the NATO ships had eased back into a posture that looked normal to an outsider. Deck crews went back to routines. The galley served food. Radios carried mundane traffic. But inside the combat systems, settings stayed changed. Parameters stayed tight. Checklists stayed open. Sailors who had been on watch during the event would remember it the way people remember near misses on highways. Not with explosions, but with the sudden awareness of fragility. One of them would later describe it in a simple sentence that captures the modern naval dilemma. It wasn't the missile that scared us. It was how little time it gave us to be right. And that is the thought that should follow you out of this story. In the age of hypersonic weapons, the line between exercise and incident is no longer drawn by intent. It's drawn by seconds. A sensor glitch, a misunderstood maneuver, a track that bends at the wrong moment, a commander who hesitates, another who assumes. What happened next after the test ended and both sides sailed on was not a battle. It was something quieter, a recalculation. Because every Navy watching that morning learned the same lesson. The ocean is still vast, but decision time is shrinking. And when speed outruns diplomacy, the most dangerous weapon on the sea might not be the missile itself. It might be the moment when someone, somewhere, has to decide what they're seeing before they truly know.